The operating room smelled like cold metal and citrus disinfectant. Bright light pooled over the table, flattening shadows until the world looked clean enough to trust. Stainless trays sat in perfect rows. A steady beep ticked from the monitor, once a second. Dr. Nora Kellen stood at the sink with her hands held high, water streaming from wrists to elbows. The soap was harsh and sharp. She scrubbed in silence, eyes fixed on the clock above the door. 07:14. Behind her, voices drifted through the open doorway. Low, playful, careless. They were not trying to be quiet. "That's her," a man said. "That's her," another voice answered, amused. Nora rinsed longer than necessary. She listened without turning her head. On the wall, a laminated chart showed the hospital's sterile protocol in bullet points. She stepped that back from the sink and let the water run off. A scrub nurse waited with a towel, then a gown, then gloves. Nora slid her arms into the gown. The cloth was stiff and warm from the pack. "Morning, Dr. Kellen," the nurse said. "Lena," Nora replied. Nurse Lena Ruiz had kind eyes that missed nothing. She secured the ties at Nora's neck with quick fingers. Lena lifted a pair of gloves. Nora extended her hands. The latex snapped softly against her wrists. That snap always landed in the same place in her mind. It was the start of something. A line crossed. Across the room, Dr. Grant Holloway was already scrubbed and waiting, shoulders, squared, posture loose, in the way of someone who expected the room to arrange itself around him. His eyes were bright above his mask, watchful, entertained. Dr. Elise Park stood near the anesthesia station, arms folded as if she were at a gallery. The residents hovered at the edges, eager and silent. Holloway leaned toward Park, voice low but not private. "HR sent us a new second assist," he said. Park's gaze flicked to Nora. It held for a beat, then moved away. "She looks like she should be doing appendectomies," Park murmured. Holloway's eyes narrowed, not unkindly, more like he was weighing risk. "Maybe she'll surprise us." Park gave a short laugh. "In this room, please." For a moment, the room settled into that kind of stillness that only exists before the first incision of the day. Nora's badge clip pressed against her scrub top, under the gown, a small, hard square. It read, "Nora Kellen, MD," in black letters with trauma surgery underneath. A second-year resident stepped closer, trying to look casual. His name tag said Mason. He kept his hands clasped at his waist, fingers twitching. "Dr. Kellen," he said. "You said Baylor, Dallas." "Houston," Nora answered. "Nice," Mason said. "So you did residency there?" Nora met his eyes for the first time. Her gaze was level, not challenging, not warm, just present. "I did my training where they needed me." Mason blinked, unsure what to do with that. Park made a quiet sound in her throat. Holloway tipped his head, watching the exchange. "Mason, focus on your lines," he said. The words were light, but the message was clear. "Stop poking the new person." Mason backed off, cheeks coloring above his mask. Nora turned her hands palm up under the surgical lights, checking the glove fit. Her left thumb had a thin, pale line near the joint, almost invisible unless you knew to look. She rolled the thumb once, then twice, loosening it as if testing the hinge on a tool. Lena saw it and pretended she did not. She kept working, laying out sponges, counting aloud with the circulating nurse. The numbers were steady ritual, a way to keep the room honest. "Count is correct," Lena said when they finished. Her voice was calm, and it filled the space better than any joke. Holloway glanced at the empty table again. "If we're going to start late, I'd like to know now," he said, to no one in particular. Park's eyes slid to the closed doors. "You'll survive, Grant." Nora crossed to the instrument table. Lena had set it up with the kind of order that pleased the hospital inspectors. Nora did not disturb that order at first. She simply looked. Forceps, clamps, needle drivers, retractors, everything polished, everything waiting. Her fingers hovered over the tray without touching it. In her head, another tray existed, one laid out on a vibrating shelf under red light where the air smelled like fuel and dust. The beep clicked again. For half a second, the sound doubled. Beep became rotor, became wind. The lights above the table became a swinging bulb. Nora kept her eyes on the instruments and breathed in through her nose, slow, controlled. She exhaled. The room returned to white. Lena watched her from the side. She did not ask a question. She simply slid a hemostat closer, as if to say, "I see you." Nora adjusted one item by the width of a finger, then another. The needle drivers now sat where her hand would find them without thought. The clamps grouped by bite strength, not by manufacturer. A resident frowned. He looked to Holloway as if seeking permission to be offended. Holloway did not look. He was talking with anesthesia about the day's schedule. "Rivergate runs tight," Holloway said, eyes on Nora now. "We do things a certain way." "I've read your protocols," Nora said. "Reading is good," Park said. "It helps when you don't have experience." Nora did not answer that. She checked the suction tubing, then the electrocautery, then the suture pack. She moved as if she were alone, as if the room's opinions were just background noise. Lena leaned in as she passed behind Nora. "Need anything?" she asked low. Nora shook her head. "Not yet." Holloway stepped to the center of the room and looked around taking inventory. "Let's keep it clean today," he said. "No hero stuff." One of the residents laughed too quickly. Nora heard the words and did not react. The phrase had been spoken by people who had never watched a hallway turn into a triage line. She flexed her fingers inside the gloves. The latex tugged at her skin. Hands first, hands only. On the far wall, a window looked out toward the river. The Mississippi lay beyond the hospital complex, dull and wide in the morning light. Farther off, the steel ribs of the Eads Bridge rose against the sky. Nora caught the sight and held it for a second. Water moving, steel holding, a place to cross. A cart rolled past the window in the door. The wheels squeaked once, then faded. Somewhere nearby, a phone rang short and sharp. Lena opened a fresh pack of gauze, making the paper crackle. Park tapped at a tablet with a gloved knuckle, pretending not to look bored. Nora listened to the room. The beep, the soft hiss of oxygen, the faint whir of the vents, the sound of people waiting. She did not blink first. She set her shoulders. She kept her chin level. She watched the closed doors with the steady focus of someone who knew that calm was always temporary. It arrived as a change in sound before anything else. A distant call over the intercom clipped and urgent. Footsteps in the hall that did not bother to soften themselves. Then the double doors swung open, and cold air rolled into the room, carrying the sharp bite of winter and something darker beneath it. "Trauma coming up," the circulating nurse said. Her tone made the words feel like a switch being flipped. Nora did not move first. She watched who moved and how. Holloway straightened as if a cord had been pulled. Park unfolded her arms and stepped toward the wall, giving the center of the room back to him. Mason and the other residents snapped into place, hands hovering at their waists, waiting for a job to be assigned. Nora felt the room tilt from boredom to hunger. Her own pulse stayed steady. She kept her hands in front of her fingers, slightly apart, ready to become whatever tool the moment demanded. Lena's voice cut through it, firm and practiced. "Clear the lane. Bring the back table in." A gurney appeared in the doorway, pushed hard enough that the wheels rattled. 2 paramedics flanked it, coats still on, faces flushed from the outside. A respiratory therapist guided the head, one hand steady on the ventilator, tubing, the other bracing the tube at the patient's mouth. The patient on the gurney was young, broad-shouldered, even under the sheets, but his color was wrong. His skin had a gray cast that made the overhead lights feel cruel. "Male 27, the lead paramedic said, breathless but controlled. "Multiple gunshot wounds, 2 to the chest, 1 to the abdomen, intubated in the field, pressure dropped twice on the way in." He spoke the way people spoke when they had said the same words too many times in one night. The second paramedic held up a clear bag of blood, still cold condensation slick on the plastic. "We started transfusion en route. Minimal response." Holloway moved to the side of the gurney, eyes scanning, mind already choosing his story. He did not touch the patient yet. He looked for the outline of control. "Name?" he asked. "Mateo Alvarez," the paramedic answered. "Gunnery sergeant, veteran. No allergies noted. Found at a gas station near the riverfront. Police report says attempted robbery." The words riverfront and robbery landed with a different weight than war. Nora felt it without reacting. Lena and the circulating nurse stripped the sheet away in one clean pull. The smell came with it, a harsh mix of burnt powder, stale sweat, and gasoline. It was a smell that did not belong in a room built to pretend the world was orderly. Nora inhaled once, slow. The scent hooked into memory without giving her a full picture. Mateo's shirt had been cut open, down the middle, the fabric stiff with dried blood. Adhesive dressings covered 3 dark spots, 2 high on the left chest, 1 lower near the ribs. A thin line of blood had escaped the tape and dried in a crooked trail across his skin. His hands were not restrained. They lay open by his sides, palms up, as if he had been surprised by sleep. On his right forearm, half hidden under a blood pressure cuff, dark ink curved in block letters, USMC. His boots were still on black and scuffed laces tied tight, like he had dressed for a long walk. There was grit on the soles that looked like river sand. 1 knuckle was split and crusted. A pale band circled his ring finger where something had been taken off in a hurry. Nora noticed it and felt a small tightening in her chest that she kept out of her hands. "Vitals?" Holloway asked. The anesthesiologist stepped forward, eyes on the monitor as it was connected. "Pressure is 80/50 and falling, heart rate 130. Sati is unstable, he's cold." Nora caught sight of the patient's neck as the respiratory therapist adjusted the tube. A chain lay against his throat, 2 metal tags half hidden by tape. They tapped together with each jolt of the gurney. The sound was small, but sharp wrong in the sterile room. Without thinking, Nora reached out and steadied them with 2 gloved fingers. The metal cooled her glove through the latex, a quick bite. She held them until the clink stopped, the edge of one tag pressed into her fingertip. Letters were stamped into it, shallow but readable. Alvarez. Holloway noticed the movement. His eyes flicked to her hand, then away as if he had seen a habit he did not understand. "Let's move," he said. His voice rose enough to fill the room without shouting. "Lena, prep chest and abdomen. Mason, get me access on both sides. Park, you want the chest or the belly first?" Park tilted her head as if the question amused her. "Chest. The belly can wait a minute." Holloway nodded. "Fine. Chest first. We need to find the leak. Kellen, you stay on retraction. Hands steady. No commentary unless I ask." "Understood," Nora said. She heard the subtext in his tone. "Do not make yourself a problem. Do not make me look at you." Nora stayed at her position close enough to see far enough that no one had to make room for her. She watched the wounds the way she watched a stranger's face in a crowded place, collecting details without staring. The entry sites were tight, neat circles. The skin around them was bruised and speckled, a fine peppering that told of a close distance. The left side of his chest rose unevenly. Not dramatic, just a hint of reluctance, as if one lung did not want to join the other. The monitor beeped faster now, impatient. Each tone pressed against Nora's ribs. The circulating nurse called out names of supplies as they arrived. Chest tube kit, rapid infuser, warming blankets, extra suction. Lena worked like she had done this in her sleep for years. She painted Mateo's skin with antiseptic orange-brown and glossy. The smell of it fought with the gasoline and nearly won. She placed drapes with quick, exact hands. The blue fabric turned Mateo into a field of surgical opportunity, leaving only the target exposed. Mason leaned close to start a line. His hands shook. He tried to hide it by moving faster, but speed did not make the tremor disappear. The catheter missed once. He swore under his breath and tried again. Holloway saw it and said nothing. He simply stepped nearer his presence, a pressure that pushed Mason into steadier work. It was a form of leadership that looked like calm from the outside and felt like heat from the inside. Nora watched Mason's jaw clench behind the mask. She knew that expression. It was the face of someone trying to become the person the room expected. "Pressure is 70 now," anesthesia said. "Give more blood," Holloway replied, already reaching for the scalpel handle that Lena held out. "Turn on the rapid infuser. Keep him warm. We cut now." Park glanced at the entry wounds, then at Holloway. "You sure you want to open without imaging?" Holloway did not look at her. "He's dying. This is the imaging." He took the scalpel and held it for a beat above Mateo's chest blade, catching the light. The room tightened around that small, bright line. Nora felt the familiar shift in herself, the narrowing of the world to hand's breadth and the truth hidden under skin. She stepped closer, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the spot Holloway chose. Lena's voice was low at Nora's side. "Retractor ready," she said. Nora nodded once. The beep on the monitor ran ahead of them fast and thin as Holloway lowered the blade. The tip of the scalpel kissed Mateo Alvarez's skin, then slid forward with clean certainty. Holloway's hand was steady, his posture loose as if the body on the table were an argument he had already won. A thin line opened. Dark blood welled up slower than Nora expected, then gathered into a glossy bead before Lena blotted it away. The scent of iron rose beneath the antiseptic. "Retract," Holloway said. Nora stepped in. She took the retractor from Lena without looking at her because looking would cost time. The metal was warm from the sterile pack. She set it against the edge of the incision and pulled gentle at first, then with firm, even pressure. Skin gave. Tissue underneath shifted like damp cloth. A soft heat breathed out from the opening. The monitor kept its fast rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. Holloway extended the cut. "Let's get into the chest," he said, voice smooth enough to calm the room. Lena stood close, hands ready, counting under her breath as she laid sponges into Nora's sightline. 1, 2, 3. Nora's eyes returned to the entry wounds. The upper one sat near the left clavicle, with faint stippling around it. The lower one was near the ribs. The spacing did not feel random. It felt like someone had aimed, adjusted, aimed again. "Gas station," the paramedic had said. Not a battlefield. Nora kept the thought behind her teeth. Holloway asked for the rib spreader. Lena placed it in his hand. He used it with brisk confidence, turning the knob until the chest wall opened. The sound was small, a wet creak that did not belong under bright light. The ventilator pushed air in, pulled air out. The left side of Mateo's chest rose a little less than the right, the difference subtle but stubborn. Under the drapes, warming blankets hummed. The rapid infuser clicked as it pushed blood through a coil. Nora watched the faint blue at Mateo's lips and kept her hands steady. Nora's left thumb tingled inside the glove. She rolled it once on the retractor handle, then steadied it, matching her breath to a rhythm learned in louder places. In for 4, hold, out for 4. Holloway leaned in, peering into the space he had made. "Where are you hiding?" he said, almost to himself. Nora saw the blood before it became obvious. Not a flood, a persistence. A dark sheen collecting deeper than the suction could clear, slipping along a plane that suggested the source sat behind something. She did not speak yet. She was still reading. On the wall monitor, the numbers flickered. Heart rate held at 130. Pressure hovered in the 70s. Anesthesia spoke. He's cold. He needs volume. Keep it coming, Holloway replied. I want control. For a moment, the word control scraped at Nora's ribs. Bright white light in her mind shifted to a red glow. Rotor noise pressed in. Someone shouted a call sign in her ear. She blinked once and the room snapped back into place, clean and white with the beep still running fast. Nora adjusted the retractor by the width of a fingertip. The view changed. A jagged sliver of rib bone appeared pale and wet, sitting wrong. It looked like a tooth. Behind it something dark moved with each pulse, then vanished again. Lena's eyes followed Nora's hands. Her brows lifted slightly. Recognition, not surprise. Holloway stayed focused on the center, searching for an obvious vessel, an obvious leak, an obvious fix. He asked for cautery. The tip crackled once sharp and dry, and the smell of singed tissue cut through everything. Mason stood at Nora's shoulder, holding suction. His grip was too tight. The tubing shivered each time he moved. He watched Holloway's hands as if the next motion would explain everything. Park murmured from the side. If it's a big vessel, we're in trouble. Holloway reached deeper. The suction slurped. Blood swirled in the tubing darker than it should have been, mixed with something thin and bright. Keep that tip where I can see. Holloway snapped at Mason without looking up. Yes, Dr. Mason said, voice thin. Nora caught a flash of Mateo's dog tags again taped to his neck, now metal glinting against skin. Alvarez stamped shallow. She had seen that name before in places that smelled like dust and fuel, on a helmet band, on a roster clipped to a stretcher, and she had watched a young Marine with the same eyes press gauze to someone else's wound while he waited for her hands to finish the job. He had not begged. He had not shaken. He had just held pressure and stared at her fingers. Nora kept her face still. Only her grip tightened on the retractor for a breath. Lena leaned close enough that only Nora could hear her. You know him, Lena said. Nora did not turn her head. I recognize him, she answered, choosing the smaller truth. Lena did not push. She simply slid a fresh suction tip to Mason and tapped his wrist once. A quiet correction. Mason loosened his grip. His breathing slowed. Holloway asked for a clamp. Lena passed it. He clamped something that bled, but the bleeding did not stop. It shifted, then returned stubborn as gravity. Damn it, Holloway said louder now. Anesthesia's voice sharpened. Pressure is 68. He's not responding. Holloway's shoulders rose and fell once. A controlled inhale, a controlled exhale. He was still in charge, still playing the part, but the edges were fraying. Nora watched the chest wall. The uneven rise was getting worse. The left side lagged more now, as if air was taking the long way around. A small froth appeared at the edge of the field and vanished into suction. She leaned a half-inch closer. With her peripheral vision, she tracked Holloway's line of exploration. He kept chasing the center. He kept chasing the obvious. Nora drew the path in her head. Entry, angle, deflection, bone, fragment. A vessel tucked behind the ribs where the books loved to keep it small on the page. She spoke once, quiet and clean. Dr. Holloway. He did not answer. He did not look up. Park glanced at Nora. Let him work, she said, not unkind, just final. Noise, Nora thought, tasting the word without letting it reach her hands. Holloway's hand moved again, sharper now. The suction filled faster. Mason shifted to keep up. The beep stayed tight, a thin rope stretched too far. Nora's left thumb pressed against the retractor handle, the old scar line under the glove, reminding her that bodies did not forgive. She turned the retractor a fraction more. The jagged rib fragment came into full view. Behind it, a dark pulse flickered, almost hidden. With each beat, a small surge of blood escaped, not dramatic enough to draw attention, but steady enough to drain a life away. Nora held the view open and kept her voice inside her mouth. The sterile world stayed bright and orderly, while the blood kept finding its way into places it did not belong. The pulse behind the rib fragment kept blinking like a hidden signal. Nora held the retractor steady and watched the blood escape in small, faithful surges. Holloway worked the center of the cavity, chasing larger structures, chasing the clean answers the anatomy atlas promised. His gloved fingers pushed tissue aside. Suction followed. Cautery hissed and popped. The monitor's tone tightened again. The beeps came closer together, thinner, impatient. Pressure is 62, anesthesia said. Holloway did not look up. More blood. Keep it running. The rapid infuser clicked faster. A bag emptied, then another appeared. Warmed blood traveled through clear tubing, a dark ribbon forced into a body that could not hold on to it. Mason's suction canister filled to the line, then climbed past it. Swap it, Lena said. The circulating nurse moved in quick and efficient hands, sure in a way that made Mason look even younger. The full canister came off with a wet tug. The fresh one snapped into place. The smell of iron thickened. It lived in the back of Nora's throat, metallic and stubborn, like she had bitten her tongue. Holloway's shoulders were still squared, but his movements had lost their earlier ease. He tried to find the bleeding by feel, sweeping his hand across planes of tissue, pausing where it was wettest, clamping where it seemed plausible. The clamp clicked shut. The blood did not stop. It shifted, pooled somewhere else, then returned with the same rhythm, a quiet refusal. Park's eyes narrowed. She leaned in just enough to see, not enough to commit. "This is not matching the wounds," she said, more to the room than to Holloway. "It's matching shock," Holloway answered. His voice was sharper now. He asked for another clamp, then another. Lena placed each instrument into his palm without hesitation. Her hands stayed calm, but her eyes kept darting to the monitor, then back to the field. "Heart rate 140, anesthesia said. He's acidotic. We're losing him." A tone changed on the monitor, a pitch that edged toward alarm. The room's ventilation seemed louder. The lights above the table threw hard glare on wet tissue, turning blood into black lacquer. Holloway leaned closer. Sweat had gathered at his hairline under the cap. It beaded and rolled toward his temple, trapped by the elastic band. "Where is it coming from?" he muttered. Nora watched his search pattern. It was systematic. It was wrong for this mess. The jagged rib fragment sat there like a trapdoor. Behind it, the vessel kept pulsing. Each beat released another small gift of blood into the wrong space. Nora felt the weight of the retractor in her hands, steady as a promise. She adjusted her stance to keep her arms from tiring. Her shoulders stayed down, her elbows stayed close. The technique came without conscious thought. Mason's breathing had become audible through his mask. Inhale, exhale, fast. His eyes were wide, fixed on the blood in the suction line, as if it were a test he might fail. "Keep your tip where he can see," Lena whispered to him again, firm but not cruel. Mason nodded and swallowed. His Adam's apple jumped. He shifted the suction a centimeter. Holloway snapped, "Not there! There!" Mason corrected. The suction slurped and the field cleared for a moment. Nora's view sharpened. She could see the fragment, the dark pulse, the thin stream that was stealing time. It was so close. It was right there. The monitor tone spiked again. "Pressure, 58, anesthesia said. I need you to control hemorrhage now." Holloway's jaw set. He reached deeper, pushed aside the lung's edge, searching for a dramatic tear, a hole that matched the story he wanted to tell. Nora's eyes tracked the chest wall. Mateo's left side still lagged, a subtle lag, but it carried a threat. Air and blood were competing for space. The lung looked tired. The ventilator pushed. The chest rose unevenly. A faint froth appeared again, pink and transient, then vanished into suction. Nora's left thumb tingled. The scar beneath the glove felt hot, as if the skin remembered its own injury. For half a second, the OR light became harsher, the air became thinner, and the beep in her ears blurred. Rotor, wind, a strap cutting into her shoulder, a voice in a headset saying numbers that mattered. She forced her focus back to the table. Bright white, blue drapes, Lena's steady hands, the smell of antiseptic battling gasoline and blood. Holloway asked any sign of pericardial injury. Park answered, "Not obvious." "Not obvious," Holloway repeated, as if the phrase offended him. Anesthesia's hands moved quickly at the head of the bed, adjusting medications, pushing calcium, calling for labs. The anesthesiologist's eyes were narrow and tired. "His temperature is dropping," anesthesia said. "He's coagulopathic. Everything is going to bleed." Holloway's voice rose a notch. "Keep him warm. Give TXA if you haven't." "Already did," anesthesia shot back. The room had changed. The earlier teasing, the casual confidence, all of it had been burned off by the smell of blood and the sound of alarms. Park stepped closer, now finally drawn in by necessity. "We might need to extend. Get exposure." Holloway nodded too fast. "Extend. Yes, extend." He lengthened the incision. The chest wall opened wider. The rib spreader creaked again as it widened, and Nora felt it in her teeth. Blood slid along the posterior wall, dark and slick. It hid in shadows pooled behind folds, then reappeared when the suction moved away. The bleeding was not a fountain. It was a leak with patience. That was what made it dangerous. Holloway cursed under his breath. He switched hands, then switched again. His gloves were shiny with blood. He asked for a sponge and wiped as if wiping could return order. Lena placed a fresh sponge in his hand. Her gaze flicked to Nora's retractor position, then back to the field, then to the monitor. Nora saw it. Lena saw it. Holloway did not. Mason's voice cracked. "Doctor, can I get another suction?" "Stay with what you have," Holloway snapped. Mason flinched and stayed. The monitor alarm escalated. The beeps turned into a continuous tone for a beat, then broke apart again, frantic. Anesthesia called out, "We're at 50 systolic." Holloway froze for the smallest moment, just long enough for fear to show through the cracks. Then he moved again, faster, less precise. He probed deeper. Tissue tore under pressure. The suction filled again. The chest cavity seemed to make more blood than a body should hold. Park's voice was cooler than the rest. "Grant, you're not finding it?" Holloway's eyes flashed. "I'm finding it." Park did not back away. "Then show me." The words landed hard. Holloway's breathing changed. He tightened his grip on the instrument knuckles, whitening under latex. Nora felt something shift in the room, a dangerous kind of focus. Holloway had turned his fight toward being right, not toward saving the patient. Nora kept her hands steady. She did not push. She watched the pulse behind the rib fragment again. It was still there, still bleeding, still consistent, still solvable. She leaned forward a fraction and changed the angle of the retractor, opening the view just a little more. The jagged bone caught the light now. Behind it, the vessel's torn edge glistened. It was a small target, but it was everything. Lena's eyes met Nora's for a breath. No words, just that brief shared recognition that the answer was sitting in plain sight. Nora's voice stayed inside her mouth. She could feel the room's hierarchy like a physical object. Holloway at the center, Park beside him, Mason behind, eager and terrified, Nora where she had been placed. "Pressure 48, anesthesia said, and this time the tone was not a report. It was a warning." Holloway's hands trembled slightly as he reached for another clamp. He clamped again somewhere that seemed logical, somewhere that should have worked. The blood kept coming. Anesthesia's voice tightened. "We're about to lose a pulse." Holloway swallowed. His eyes darted once to the monitor, then back to the open chest as if refusing to accept what the numbers were saying. Nora felt her own pulse remain slow-controlled, but there was a pressure behind her ribs now, an urge that had nothing to do with ego and everything to do with time. She had seen bodies cross this line before. She had seen the exact second when a patient stopped being salvageable and became a memory everyone carried out of the room. Holloway leaned closer and said, almost pleading, "Where are you?" Nora's grip on the retractor did not change. Her shoulders stayed down. Her eyes stayed on the hidden vessel. The pulse behind the rib fragment blinked again, and each blink was another subtraction. She drew in a quiet breath through her nose and let it out slowly, tasting antiseptic and blood. Then she shifted her weight forward close enough that her voice could be heard without raising it. Nora leaned in close enough that she did not have to fight the room to be heard. Her voice came out low and even, as if she were speaking to the patient and not to the ego hovering over him. "Dr. Holloway," she said. "Posterior chest wall, behind the rib fragment. The bleed is tucked back there." Holloway did not turn his head. He kept his eyes inside the cavity, hands moving. Searching, clamping, wiping. "Retract," he said, as if he had not heard her. Nora held her position. The retractor did not shake. She kept the view open, kept the light on the problem. "It is pulsing," she continued, one step more specific. "Intercostal vessel may be a branch that is feeding into the posterior space." Holloway's hand paused for the first time in a full second. He looked up just enough to aim his eyes at her without fully leaving the field. "I did not ask," he said. The words were quiet. That was what made them sharp. In the silence between monitor alarms, they landed like a blade on a tray. Park's gaze moved from the wound to Nora's face. Her eyes held no sympathy, only curiosity, like she was watching a chess match for the first mistake. Nora kept her mouth closed for one beat. She listened to the monitor and the ventilator. She listened to the way the suction kept working too hard. She watched the blood return each time Holloway thought he had improved something. Anesthesia spoke again. "We are at 44 systolic." Holloway snapped more blood. "Push it!" "I am pushing it," Anesthesia replied. The anesthesiologist's voice was tight now, professional but strained, the sound of someone who had reached the edge of what medicine could brute force. Lena's eyes flicked to Nora, then to the jagged rib, then to Holloway's hands. Her jaw tightened beneath her mask. She did not say a word. Nora breathed in through her nose. The air tasted like antiseptic and heat. She spoke again, still controlled. "Sir, the trajectory suggests the primary leak is not central. The bone is acting like shrapnel. You are chasing the wrong plane." Holloway's head turned fully this time. His eyes were bright with irritation, and under it something else. A thin thread of fear he was trying to burn away with authority. "Kellen," he said. He made her name a warning. "You are here to assist." "I am assisting," Nora replied. Her tone did not rise. That was not defiance. That means it was a fact. Holloway's nostrils flared. He looked past her for a second, as if checking who was watching. Mason stood frozen with suction eyes wide. Park stood still, hands at her sides, giving nothing away. Lena's hands hovered over the instrument table, ready for either outcome. The monitor changed pitch again. The alarm did not scream yet. It trembled at the edge of it. Anesthesia said, "I am losing the waveform." That sentence carried weight in a room like this. It meant the patient was slipping out from under them. It meant no more time for pride. Holloway turned back to the chest and reached deeper, faster. His fingers slid along wet tissue. He tried to expose the hilum, tried to find an obvious tear, something he could clamp and call solved. It was not there. The bleeding behind the rib fragment kept blinking. Nora held the view open, and the blood kept sliding into the shadows. Park spoke, voice smooth. Grant, you need exposure. Widen. Get control. I have control, Holloway said too quickly. Park's eyes did not soften. Then why are the numbers falling? Holloway exhaled hard. He asked for another retractor. Lena placed it into his hand. He did not thank her. He set it harshly, widening the field with a movement that tugged tissue and made the suction line surge. Mateo's body did not flinch. He was too deep, too far away. The ventilator pushed air in. The left side still lagged. The oxygen saturation on the monitor dipped, climbed, dipped again, as if it could not decide where to settle. Nora watched the chest wall and felt a pressure in her own chest, the same pressure she had felt in loud places when seconds mattered, and there was no room for a man to be offended. She could smell gasoline again. Faint but persistent. It clung to Mateo's skin like a confession. It did not belong to a firefight. It belonged to streetlights and concrete, to a place where a person could bleed out in front of strangers. Holloway's voice cut through her thoughts. Stop hovering. Nora did not move. I need to keep the view open. I said stop, Holloway barked. The outburst filled the room loud enough that even Park's brows lifted. It was not just anger. It was panic wearing anger's suit. Nora felt Mason shift behind her. The young resident's fear had become contagious. His suction tip wobbled. Lena reached out and steadied Mason's wrist with 2 fingers, a small correction that said, breathe. Nora spoke again, more direct now, the softness gone from the edges. We have to explore the posterior wall, she said. If it is a vertebral branch, he will not tolerate more delay. Holloway froze. The word vertebral landed like a spark near fuel. It implied a problem that did not respond to simple clamps. It implied a level of chaos that did not respect the surgeon's reputation. Holloway's eyes snapped to hers. Enough. He straightened, chest rising. Blood shone on his gloves. The overhead lights made it look almost black. You do not get to run my room, he said. You do not get to call vessels you have not exposed. Nora kept her gaze steady. I am calling what I can see. Holloway looked at the field again, then back at her, and the restraint in his face broke. Step back, he said. Now. The command was not about safety. It was about control. For a moment, no one moved. The room held its breath. Even the suction seemed to pause between slurps. Nora felt the retractor in her hands, the patient's tissue under tension, the clean line of sight she had preserved. If she stepped back, the view would collapse. The rib fragment would hide again. The bleeding would keep winning in the dark. Anesthesia spoke, forcing reality back into the room. We have no pulse pressure. I need hemorrhage control. Holloway did not answer anesthesia. He stared at Nora. Step back, he repeated, quieter, more dangerous. Park did not intervene. Her silence had weight. It said, let him have his hierarchy, let him fall or stand on his own. Lena's eyes stayed on Nora. Not pleading, not dramatic, just present like a hand on a shoulder. Nora made a choice that tasted like metal. She adjusted the retractor just enough to ease tension, then carefully transferred it to Holloway's field, letting him take it without making it look like surrender or challenge. She moved her hands out of the center and stood half a step back, palms open and visible. Her gloves were smeared with blood along the fingertips. She held them still. Holloway turned back to the chest, as if the room had snapped back into order because he said so. He reached in again, searching with renewed fury. He asked for suction repositioning. Mason complied too fast. The field flooded again. The alarm finally screamed. A long tone filled the room, then broke into frantic beeps that sounded less like a metronome and more like a warning siren. Nora's mind caught the sound, and for a beat it tried to become something else. Rotor. Wind. A headset pressed to her ear. She forced it back to beep. Beep in a clean room. Beep in Missouri. Beep! That meant a man on a table was leaving. Anesthesia's voice rose. I am losing him! Holloway's hands moved faster, not better. He clamped blindly at a wet spot and missed. He wiped and the blood returned. He widened the spreader another notch and the rib creaked in protest. Mateo's chest cavity looked like a storm. Nora watched the posterior wall from her new angle. The jagged rib fragment still existed half hidden now, but she could see enough to know the bleed was still there. Still blinking, still solvable, still ignored. Mason's breathing turned ragged. Park's lips pressed into a thin line. Lena kept feeding instruments with steady hands, but her eyes had gone hard focused on one thing only. Anesthesia said we are about to lose a pulse. The words hit the room and stayed there heavy as the smell of blood. Holloway stared into the open chest as if he could intimidate the bleeding into stopping. His shoulders shook once with an inhale that did not get him enough air. Nora stood with her hands held ready, feeling time narrow to a point. The monitor screamed again, and the numbers on the screen fell in a way that did not leave room for interpretation. The numbers on the screen dropped in clean digital steps. 48, 42. The waveform thinned until it looked like a nervous pencil line. Anesthesia spoke over the alarms. I cannot feel a pulse. Holloway's hands stayed inside the chest anyway, as if refusing to hear it could make it untrue. He pressed, swept, clamped. Blood slid around his fingers like oil. Grant Park said, and this time she used his first name. It was not comfort. It was a warning dressed as familiarity. Holloway did not answer. He leaned closer. The light reflected off his wet gloves. His shoulders rose and held trapped in a breath. Nora stood half a step back, hands still lifted, palms visible. The room had put her in a smaller place, but her mind did not shrink with her body. She kept seeing the posterior wall, the rib fragment, the pulse that kept blinking in the dark, a small target that mattered more than anything Holloway was chasing. The monitor screamed again, a long tone, then frantic beeps. For an instant, the sound in Nora's head tried to turn into something else. Rotor blades cutting air, a headset pressed into her ear, a medic shouting numbers that meant nothing without action. She forced the sound back into this room. White walls, blue drapes, Missouri, a man on a table. Anesthesia's hands moved fast at the head of the bed. I am maxed. I cannot keep him asleep and alive. Holloway snapped, keep him down. I am trying, Anesthesia shot back. He is fighting it. As if hearing them, the body on the table changed. Mateo Alvarez's throat worked around the tube. His chest twitched under the drapes. Not a big movement, a protest. Holloway did not notice. He was still hunting. Then Mateo's eyelids fluttered. At first it looked like a reflex, a tiny electrical misfire in a dying system. The lashes trembled, then stopped. The lids parted again. This time they stayed open a fraction longer. His eyes were bloodshot and glassy. They darted unfocused. Panic lived in them before comprehension did. Anesthesia cursed under his breath. He is waking. Push more, Holloway said. I am pushing, Anesthesia replied, his voice strained. He is not holding it. Mateo's gaze skated across the bright ceiling, then down into the light, then sideways toward shapes and masks. His eyes found Holloway first, then Park, then Mason. None of those faces anchored him. They were strangers in blue. His eyes shifted again. They landed on Nora. Even behind her mask, something changed in Mateo's expression. The panic did not vanish, but it rearranged. It narrowed. It sharpened into recognition. His right hand lifted off the table, slow at first, then faster, driven by something deeper than muscle. The hand rose through the air and grabbed Nora's left wrist. The grip was shocking. Not gentle, not polite. It was the kind of grip that said, do not leave me. Nora did not flinch. She turned her wrist slightly so the pressure did not twist the joint. Her eyes stayed on his. She did not pull away. She knew what sudden movement did to a frightened body. Mateo tried to speak. The tube stole his words and gave back only a wet sound. He fought it anyway. His throat strained. His eyes watered. He forced out, then tried again. Nora leaned closer just enough to hear him without making it a spectacle. The overhead light made Mateo's pupils tight. Sweat had broken out on his forehead despite the cold skin. Mateo's fingers tightened around her wrist. His knuckles were pale. He managed a sound that almost became a name. Kellen, he rasped, barely there. Holloway turned his head sharply. What is happening? Park stepped closer. Mason froze, suction tip hovering in the air. Mateo's eyes never left Nora. He swallowed hard, then pushed again, making the tube rattle slightly. Kandahar, he got out the syllables, broken but clear enough to land. His eyes widened with effort. Doc, you. Nora felt the old world press at the edges of the new one. Dust, heat, rotor noise. A field tent where the light swung and the floor was never still. A young Marine holding pressure on someone else while his own arm bled. A face tilted toward her, hands waiting. Nora kept her voice steady. Mateo, stay with me. Mateo's eyes flashed. He heard her. The recognition deepened into certainty. He tried again, and this time the words made it through. She saved us, he rasped, the sound ugly around the tube, but the meaning clean. Afghan. The room stopped. Even the suction seemed louder in the pause. The beeps became the only movement, frantic and accusing. Holloway's hands froze inside the open chest. He stared across the field at Nora as if she had just shifted shape. Park's expression tightened. Her eyes moved to Nora's badge, then to Nora's hands, then to Mateo's face. Calculation, recalibration. Mason's mouth opened slightly behind his mask. He looked from Mateo to Nora, searching for the joke. There was none. Mateo's grip stayed locked on Nora's wrist. His breath hitched against the ventilator rhythm. Tears pooled at the corners of his eyes and did not fall. He forced his throat to work again. He looked past Nora toward Holloway, then back to Nora, and the plea turned into something that sounded like an order. Let her, he managed, voice thin and ragged. She knows. Combat bleed. Anesthesia spoke softly, almost reverent in spite of himself. He is lucid enough to know her. Holloway's face went pale above the mask. The skin around his eyes tightened. His gaze flicked just once to the monitor. The numbers were still falling. He looked back at Nora. For the first time since she entered this room, his eyes held fear without dressing it in sarcasm. Fear for the patient. Fear for himself. Fear of being seen failing. Mateo's fingers tightened again, as if he could squeeze the decision out of her. His eyes stayed on Nora. He tried to speak one more time, pushing every ounce of will through the tube. Please, he rasped. The word was small. It was heavy. Holloway swallowed. His throat moved under the mask. He looked down at his hands, wet and trembling, then back at the open chest. He looked like a man trying to decide whether pride could stop blood. Park said nothing. Her silence gave Holloway no cover. Lena stepped closer to the table. She did not speak either. She placed her hands near the instrument tray, ready, waiting for someone to call the right name. Nora did not move her wrist. She let Mateo hold on. She met Holloway's eyes across the sterile field. The monitor beeped fast, then faster. A thin sound stretched too far. Holloway's shoulders dropped a fraction, the way they do when a person finally stops pretending. He lifted his gaze to Nora, and his voice came out low. Dr. Kellen, he said. The title sounded different now. What do you need? Nora did not waste a breath on explanations. She did not look at Park to see if she had permission. She did not look at Mason to see if he approved. She looked at the open chest, the blood, the rib fragment, the hidden pulse. Then she spoke in a tone the room recognized instantly. Not loud, not emotional. Command. Thoracotomy tray, she said. Now. 2 units of O negative at the table. Call blood bank and put 6 more on standby. Warm everything. Lena moved before the sentence ended. Thorac tray, she called to the circulating nurse. The circulating nurse was already halfway to the door. Anesthesia straightened relief and urgency mixing in his voice. Blood bank is online. Rapid infuser is ready. Nora shifted her stance closer to the table. She did it smoothly, not pushing Holloway aside, not challenging him. She simply stepped into the space where the work needed to be done. Mateo's hand still held her wrist. Nora looked down at him. Mateo, she said, quiet and close. Let go. His eyes flicked to hers. His grip loosened. The hand fell back to the table, heavy and obedient, as if he had spent his last strength on making the room listen. Nora turned back to Holloway. Retractor, she said. Holloway hesitated for half a beat. Not stubbornness. Shock. Then he did something that changed the air in the room more than any apology could have. He obeyed. He shifted, giving her angle. Here, he said, handing the retractor position back without saying he was handing it back. Nora took it and opened the view with a careful, practiced pull. Her elbows stayed close to her body. Her wrists stayed neutral. The motion was economical, as if she had learned it in a place where fatigue killed. The jagged rib fragment came into full light. Look, she said, not to show off, but to orient the team. Bone fragment. It is shielding the source. Mason leaned in suction tip, hovering eyes wide. Hold suction here, Nora told him. She pointed with 2 fingers, precise. Do not chase the blood. Hold it where it is coming from. Mason nodded too fast. Yes, doctor. He placed the suction exactly where she indicated. The field cleared for a moment, and the hidden pulse became obvious. A torn vessel edge glistening, blinking with each heartbeat. Nora felt the old calm settle into her shoulders. The beep on the monitor stayed frantic, but inside her something clicked into place. Hands, pressure, angle, solve. Intercostal branch, she said. Posterior. The bleed is slipping into the backspace, not pooling where you can see it. Park stepped closer. Her eyes narrowed, not in doubt, but in focus. How do you want to approach? Nora answered without looking away from the vessel. I want a clamp with a fine bite. I need you ready with suture, and I need room. Lena placed the clamp into Nora's palm. Nora did not say thank you. Not because she was rude, because the time for polite talk had passed. Lena did not take it personally. She tracked Nora's hands like a dancer following a lead. Nora worked around the rib fragment. She did not yank it. She did not waste motion. She used the fragment as a reference point, a landmark. She slid the clamp in along the plane of tissue, following the blood trail, backward, not forward. The clamp met resistance. Nora adjusted by a fraction. The torn vessel edge fluttered against the suction. Hold, Nora said to Mason. Mason held. His hands shook, but he held. Nora placed the clamp. Click. The pulse stopped. For a heartbeat, no new blood emerged. The cavity looked suddenly calmer, like a storm that had lost its wind. Anesthesia's voice lifted. I have a waveform. Pressure is coming up. 60. 70. A sound moved through the room. Not celebration. Release. A breath people had been holding without noticing. Holloway stared at the clamp Nora had placed. His eyes followed her fingers as if he were seeing a language he had never learned. Nora did not pause. She knew what happened when you paused too early. Do not trust it yet, she said. There is secondary damage. Park nodded once sharp. Shrapnel effect. Nora glanced at Park for the first time. A flicker of respect passed between them, brief and unspoken. Nora pointed to the jagged rib. This is the problem. High-velocity impact fractures bone. Bone becomes projectiles inside the chest. You can clamp the obvious and still lose the patient to the hidden. Holloway's jaw flexed behind his mask. He looked down at his gloves, then back at the field. His voice came out rough. Tell me what you need. Nora did not soften. I need you to retract. I need you steady. Holloway moved into position, careful now. His hand stopped trembling when he had a clear job that did not involve being right. Lena handed Nora a suture. Nora took it and worked with speed that looked like calm. Her fingers moved as if they were remembering, not thinking. She tied a stitch, then another. The vessel edge disappeared beneath precise bites of thread. The knot seated clean, not too tight, not too loose. She cut. She checked. Release suction for a second, she told Mason. Mason lifted the tip slightly. Blood did not surge. Nora watched the field for the kind of slow seep that could betray a second injury. She traced the wound path with her eyes. Entry angle. Depth. Where bone could have ricocheted. She did not need a scan to imagine it. She had learned to think like the object that caused the damage. Lung looks bruised, Park said quietly. Get ready for a chest tube, Nora replied, and check for another leak point along the posterior line. Park moved to examine with more purpose now, less commentary, more teamwork. Anesthesia reported again. Pressure is 100, heart rate is down to 120. The beeps on the monitor began to spread out. Still fast, but no longer frantic. The sound lost its edge. In Nora's head, the rotor noise that had been threatening all morning faded. The beep stayed a beep. Lena spoke softly. Blood bank confirms 6 units on standby. 2 are here. Good, Nora said. She moved her hands to the rib fragment. It sat awkwardly, a sharp piece that could keep tearing with each movement. We need to stabilize this, Nora said. It is cutting every time the chest expands. Holloway leaned in. Remove it. Not blindly, Nora answered. If you pull it wrong, you open the vessel again. She shifted the fragment with a tool, gentle, controlled. She found the point where it hinged and lifted it just enough to slide it out without ripping tissue. She placed it on a sponge, as if placing a weapon down. The cavity looked cleaner already. Mason exhaled loud enough that the sound escaped his mask. He caught himself and went still again. Nora checked the posterior wall one more time. No blink of fresh blood. The field held. She allowed herself one small inhale that felt like air reaching deeper into her lungs. Park said, "That was fast." Nora did not answer the compliment. She watched the oxygen saturation climb into safer numbers. She watched the temperature line stabilize as warming efforts caught up. Anesthesia sounded less strained. He is responding now. Lactate is still high, but improving. Holloway's voice came out low. How did you see it? Nora kept her eyes on the chest. Because it did not behave like a clean wound. Holloway waited, not impatient now, listening. Nora continued, still working. In this room, people expect patterns. Streets and war do not care what people expect. You read what the body shows you. You follow the trajectory. You watch how the chest moves. You look where the blood wants to hide. Holloway swallowed. He nodded once, almost imperceptible. Lena adjusted the light for Nora without being asked. Nora did not look up. She felt it and used it. They placed a chest tube. Park handled it smoothly, her movements now less performative and more grounded. The tube slid into place. Air hissed softly through the system. The left side of Mateo's chest rose more evenly. Nora began closing. Layer by layer. No wasted motion. Her hands stayed steady. As she sutured, she noticed something near Mateo's lower entry site. A faint smudge on the skin that antiseptic had not fully removed. A dark streak that looked like soot. Not dirt, not sand, soot and oil. Gasoline, she thought, again, and the thought stayed. Holloway watched her hands the way Mason had watched his. Not with worship, with attention. With the uncomfortable awareness that skill could come from places he had never been. When Nora tied the final knot, the room felt different. Not warmer, not friendlier, just more honest. Anesthesia said he is stable enough for transport. Nora set her hands down for the first time in what felt like hours. Her fingers flexed inside the gloves, then went still again. The latex squeaked faintly. Holloway cleared his throat. Dr. Kellen. Nora looked at him. His eyes held no sarcasm now. They held an exhaustion that came from nearly losing someone and realizing it could have been his fault. I owe you, he said. Nora did not accept it. She did not refuse it. She simply turned her gaze back to Mateo and checked the chest tube once more. Move him carefully, she said. Do not let that tube kink. Keep him warm. Lena and the circulating nurse prepared the transfer. Mason stepped back, blinking hard, as if he had forgotten he was allowed to breathe. Park removed her gloves and glanced at Nora, a look that could have been admiration if it were not so guarded. You have done this before, she said. Nora pulled her gaze from the monitors long enough to meet Park's eyes. Yes, she replied. They began to wheel Mateo out. The doors opened. Cool hallway air washed in again. As the gurney passed through, Nora caught sight of Mateo's dog tags. They swung once, then settled. No clink this time. The monitor on the transport rig beeped in a steadier rhythm, not gentle but not screaming. Nora stayed in the doorway for a breath, watching the team move with purpose. Now watching the blood on the floor get wiped away by a silent orderly. She looked back at the table, at the instruments, at the rib fragment sitting on a sponge like a small, broken tooth. Then she turned to Holloway. There's something else, she said, voice quiet. Holloway's eyes narrowed alert again. What? Nora glanced toward the hall where the gurney had disappeared. Those shots were close. The pattern does not fit combat. She said nothing more. She did not need to. The detail hung in the room heavy as the smell of gasoline that still clung to the drapes. Holloway's eyes stayed on Nora, as if he were trying to decide whether to argue with her or accept the shape of the facts. Behind his mask, his breathing sounded heavier than it had at the start of the case. Park glanced toward the doorway where Mateo had been taken, then back to the table. Her voice was quiet. Close range, she said, tasting the idea. Not distance. Nora nodded once. Stippling. Soot. Gasoline. It is not sand and dust. Holloway looked down at the rib fragment on the sponge. A small, pale curve of bone, jagged as a torn nail. It sat under the light like evidence. We saved him, he said, and the words sounded like he needed them to be true in more than one way. We stopped the bleeding, Nora replied. She kept her gaze on the instrument scanning out of habit. No missing sponge, no stray needle, no loose thread. The kind of mistakes that showed up later when the adrenaline was gone. Lena's voice cut in steady and practical. Final count is correct. The circulating nurse echoed it for the chart. Final count. Correct. The room began to exhale in pieces. The vents sighed. The overhead lights buzzed. Someone wiped the floor where blood had splashed beyond the drapes, the mop head moving in slow arcs that looked almost gentle. Mason stood near the wall, hands still lifted as if he were afraid to touch anything ever again. His eyes were bright. Not tears exactly, just the raw shine of someone who had watched the line between living and dead move under his hands. Anesthesia removed his gloves and flexed his fingers. He's going to ICU intubated, he said. We got him warm. We got his pressure stable enough. Labs are still ugly. Holloway nodded. He reached up and adjusted his mask with a motion that was more about grounding himself than comfort. Call me if he dips. I want updates. You will get them, anesthesia replied. No warmth, no edge, only fatigue. Lena began to break down the table, sliding used instruments into a tray with controlled efficiency. Metal clinked softly. The sound was almost soothing, like rain on a roof. Nora watched her hands for a beat. Lena moved with the calm certainty of someone who had seen too much and decided to keep showing up anyway. You saw it, Lena said quietly, not looking up. Nora answered with the same quiet honesty. Yes. Why did you not take over sooner? Nora kept her face still. Because it was not my room. Lena's fingers paused on a hemostat. She set it down gently. Rooms do not save people. Nora did not reply. She did not disagree either. She simply turned toward the sink. The moment the gloves came off, the air felt different on her skin. Cooler. Too exposed. She peeled the latex from her fingers and dropped it into the bin. A smear of dried blood remained at the base of her thumb. It was not much, but she felt it like grit. She began to wash. Water ran clear over her hands. Soap foamed. The scent of it was sharp and clean, a lie the hospital told itself. The smell of gasoline remained anyway. Not in the air. In her memory, in the back of her throat. Holloway approached behind her. His steps were measured now, no swagger. He stopped a few feet away, giving her space as if he had learned that proximity could be a kind of violence. Dr. Kellen, he said. Nora kept her eyes on the sink. Yes. I owe you an apology. She rinsed slowly. For what? For the way I spoke to you. His voice tightened. The words did not come easily. For ignoring you. Nora shut off the water and shook her hands, dry droplets flicking into the basin. She did not turn yet. You were scared, she said. Holloway stayed silent. It was not a denial. Nora finally faced him. His eyes looked different now, less shiny, more human. The arrogance had not vanished. It had simply taken a step back to make room for reality. The patient is alive, Nora said. That is all that matters. Holloway nodded once as if accepting terms. Park and I, he began. Nora lifted a hand small, not dramatic. Do not make it a ceremony. His jaw worked. He swallowed whatever speech he had planned. Fine, he said. But you should have been leading that case. Nora's expression did not change. I led it when there was no other choice. Holloway held her gaze for a beat longer, then looked away. Where did you learn to see it like that? Nora could have answered with a rank and a list of places. She did not. Where the wounds were not polite, she said. Holloway gave a short, humorless exhale. Rivergate is not supposed to be a battlefield. It is not, Nora replied. but bodies do not care what a building was designed for. A door opened behind them. A man in a navy jacket stepped into the anteroom, a hospital security badge clipped to his chest. A St. Louis police officer stood beside him, cap in hand. Both men paused when they saw the surgeons, then continued forward with the careful posture of people who knew they were entering sacred space. The security officer spoke first. "Dr. Holloway, we need a quick statement for the incident report." Holloway's shoulders tightened. He glanced at Nora, then back to the officer. "The patient is in ICU. He is stable." The police officer nodded. His eyes moved across the room, taking in the blood stains, the discarded drapes, the tired faces. He looked younger than Nora expected, but his gaze held weight. "We found him at a gas station on South Broadway," the officer said. "Clerk says there was a robbery. Shots were fired. One suspect fled on foot. We have patrols out." Nora listened without interrupting. South Broadway, gas station. That explained the gasoline, the soot, the close pattern. Holloway asked any idea why he was there. The officer shrugged. He was alone. No wallet on him. Phone was smashed. He hesitated. "He has veteran identification. Marines. We are notifying next of kin." Nora felt a brief tightening behind her ribs. She kept her face still. Holloway answered with the hospital version of distance. "You can speak with the ICU team. I will give you whatever the chart allows." The officer nodded, then looked at Nora. "You were in the room." "Yes," Nora said. His eyes held on her for a beat, curious. He said something before he crashed again. Nora's pulse stayed steady. He was confused. The officer did not push. He simply nodded as if he had learned not to expect clean answers from bleeding people. "If he wakes up enough to talk, we will need his statement." He left with the security officer, their shoes squeaking faintly on the hallway floor. The room returned to its quieter noises. Water running, metal trays being stacked, paper rustling as the circulating nurse completed her documentation. Park stepped close, pulling off her cap. A line of sweat marked her forehead. She looked at Nora with the same guarded focus as before, but something had shifted in her eyes. Less dismissal, more calculation. "You were not in pediatrics," Park said. Nora met her gaze. "No." Park hesitated, then spoke as if testing a new tone. "The way you placed that clamp, the way you moved around the rib. That was not training you pick up in a clean residency." Nora did not offer her story. She simply said it was necessary. Park watched her for another beat, then turned away as if she did not like how much she had revealed by noticing. Mason remained by the wall. He looked like he wanted to speak and could not find a safe sentence. Finally, he managed Dr. Kellen. Nora turned to him. His voice was tight. "I almost lost the suction. I was shaking. I could not stop." "You held it when it mattered," Nora said. Mason blinked, startled by the simple truth. "Yes, but you told me exactly where." Nora nodded. "That is your job. Hold the line." Mason swallowed. "Thank you." Nora did not answer with another thank you. She gave him a small nod that said, "Keep going." Lena finished clearing the back table. She placed the rib fragment into a specimen container for documentation, sealing it with a snap that echoed the earlier snap of gloves. Another line crossed. Nora returned to the sink one more time. She washed again slower. The water warmed her fingers. The scar near her thumb looked paler under the bright lights, a thin reminder that skin healed, but memory did not always follow. When she dried her hands, she caught sight of the river through the door window. Gray water moving under a low winter sky, the steel ribs of the bridge beyond it holding its shape against the cold. For a moment, she imagined Mateo's boots with river sand on the sole's laces tied tight as if he had set out with purpose. She picked up her chart notes and wrote one line for the record, clean and clinical. Close-range gunshot wounds, evidence of soot and stippling. Incident location reported as gas station. She paused before closing the file. Holloway stood a few feet away, watching her, uncertain how to stand in a room where he was no longer the only authority. Lena moved around them, already resetting the space for the next patient because the hospital did not pause for anyone. Nora placed the chart down and looked toward the hallway again, toward ICU, toward the place where Mateo's chest rose and fell with the machine's help. She stood still for a breath, listening to the building's hum, to the distant call of wheels on tile, to a monitor beep from somewhere down the corridor that sounded steadier than the one that had screamed in her ears. Then she turned and walked out. Hands clean on the surface, the smell of gasoline still clinging to the edges of her thoughts. The smell of gasoline did not follow Nora into the elevator, but it stayed with her anyway. Not in her clothes, in the back of her throat, a memory that showed up when she least invited it. She pressed the button for ICU, watched the numbers light up, and listened to the quiet hum of cables inside the walls. Upstairs, the unit had its own air, warm blankets, plastic, alcohol wipes, the steady hush of machines that never got tired. Nora walked past rooms with half-drawn curtains and pale faces turned toward ceiling tiles. She scanned monitors out of habit, catching rhythms, catching subtle dips, catching the way nurses moved when they were worried. Mateo Alvarez's room sat near the end of the hall. A nurse stood outside reviewing a chart pen tucked behind her ear. "How is he?" Nora asked. The nurse looked up surprised to see her, then her expression softened. "Still intubated yesterday. Extubated this morning. He is stubborn." Nora nodded. "Good." Good and loud, the nurse added a hint of a smile. "He asked for you." Nora did not step inside. Not yet. She looked through the window in the door. Mateo lay on his back sheets pulled up to his chest. His face was a little fuller than it had been on the table. His color was still wrong, but it had life in it. His eyes were open. He stared at the ceiling with a focus that was not sleep and not fear, something in between. His hands lay on top of the blanket, open, palms down now, as if he had chosen the position. Nora watched for a beat, then kept walking. She made herself continue down the hall because seeing him alive did not erase the moment she had watched his waveform vanish. It only added a second image to carry. 3 weeks passed, the way weeks passed in hospitals. Shifts stacked on shifts. A list of names changed daily. Nora learned the building's habits. She learned which elevators were fastest, which hallways stayed quiet, which nurses had eyes that missed nothing. Holloway stopped making jokes in her presence. Park stopped pretending she was not curious. Mason looked at his own hands differently when he scrubbed. On a cold Monday morning, Nora was making rounds with a tablet tucked against her forearm when she heard laughter from the physical therapy wing. Not the brittle humor of an operating room. Something warmer, human. The sound carried down the corridor and tugged at her attention. She turned toward it without thinking. The therapy gym was bright with windows and winter sun. Machines lined the walls. Parallel bars ran across the floor like rails. A radio played low in the background, some old song softened by distance. Mateo stood between two bars, hands gripping the metal. He wore a gray shirt and loose sweatpants. His left side moved carefully, as if he did not trust it yet. A physical therapist stood beside him, with a hand near his elbow, ready to catch him, but letting him do the work. Mateo took a step. His bootless foot landed, hesitated, then held. His face tightened with effort. The same stubbornness the nurse had mentioned. The same look Nora had seen on soldiers who refused to fall down even when their bodies demanded it. The therapist glanced up and saw Nora. She raised her eyebrows as if to say, "Yes, he is doing this." Mateo turned his head, following the therapist's gaze. His eyes found Nora, and his mouth lifted into a smile that looked almost unfamiliar on him. "Doc," he called, voice rough but clear, "come check your work." Nora walked in her shoes, making a soft squeak on the polished floor. The air smelled like foam mats and disinfectant, less sharp than the OR Moore lived in. She stopped a few feet from him, letting him finish the step he was working on. "You're not supposed to just show off," she said. Mateo's smile widened. "I am not showing off. I am proving a point." The therapist snorted. "He is showing off." Mateo took another step, then paused, breathing hard. The exertion made a fine sheen of sweat on his forehead. He reached for the walker when the therapist offered it and leaned into it like a man learning a new language. He shuffled toward Nora, slow but steady, and stopped close enough that she could see the faint bruise still lingering along his ribs under the shirt. "You look like you have been arguing with gravity," Nora said. "I am winning," Mateo replied. Nora glanced at the therapist. "How is he doing?" "Better than we expected," the therapist said. "He is pushing. Sometimes too hard." Mateo lifted his chin as if the criticism pleased him. "I might go home by the end of the week." "That is good news," Nora said. She tapped her tablet and skimmed the latest imaging report. "Your chest tube site is healing. Your lung is expanding. No new bleeding." Mateo's smile softened. He lowered his gaze to his hands on the walker grips. His fingers flexed once, then tightened again, as if he were holding onto something that was not metal. "First good news I have had in months," he said. Nora looked up from the screen. The words did not fit the smile he had worn. "Not fully." The therapist checked her watch. "I will give you 2 a minute," she said, and stepped away toward another patient, but she kept them in her peripheral vision. Professional. Protective. Mateo shifted his weight and eased himself into a chair beside the parallel bars. The movement cost him. He hid it by exhaling through his nose and keeping his face steady. Nora pulled another chair closer and sat. She did not tower over him. She did not hover. She put herself at his level, close enough to be present, far enough to let him breathe. Mateo stared at the floor for a moment. The sunlight through the windows made pale rectangles across his shoes. Outside, Nora could see a strip of the river through bare tree branches, gray water sliding past concrete. Mateo spoke without looking at her. "When I woke up in that room and saw you, it was not just relief." Nora waited. "It was like my brain grabbed onto something real," he said, "like I was not floating anymore." Nora felt the familiar pressure behind her ribs. the weight of being someone's anchor. She had carried it in other places, with other names, with other faces. It never got lighter. You just learned to hold it without dropping anything else. You were bleeding out, she said quietly. Your brain was looking for a reason to stay. Mateo shook his head once. No, that is not it. He finally lifted his eyes. They were clearer now than they had been in the OR, but the darkness was still there at the edges. Do you know where I was going that night? He asked. Nora's gaze stayed steady. The report said a gas station. Mateo's mouth tightened. Before that, he looked toward the windows again, toward the strip of gray water. His voice lowered. I was walking to the bridge, he said. Nora did not react outwardly. Inside, something in her chest tightened like a fist. The Eads, Mateo added, still staring out. I parked a few blocks away because I did not want anyone to see my truck. I did not want anyone to stop me. Nora kept her hands on her knees, fingers relaxed. She did not reach for him. She did not interrupt. She knew what interruptions did to confessions. They turned them into retreats. Mateo's jaw worked as if he were chewing glass. I kept telling myself it would be quiet, that it would be fast, that it would stop the noise. He swallowed. His throat bobbed. I had it planned, he said. Like a mission. Clean. No mess for my mom. Nora breathed in slowly through her nose. The air smelled of rubber mats and sunlight. Ordinary. That ordinariness made the words hit harder. Mateo's eyes flashed once with anger, but the anger had nowhere to land. Then I saw the kid. Nora's voice was soft. At the gas station. Mateo nodded. His fingers tightened on the walker handle beside his chair, knuckles paling. He could not have been more than 16. Hoodie, hands shaking, gun too big for him. He was screaming at the old clerk behind the counter like the man was the enemy. Mateo stared at his hands as if he could see the scene there. The clerk had this look. Not fear exactly. More like he could not believe this was how he was going to die. Not in a hospital bed. Not after a long life. Right there by the lottery tickets. Mateo's voice cracked slightly, then steadied. Something in me snapped into place. Like my body remembered what my head was trying to forget. He looked at Nora now. I forgot I was a Marine for a while. Or maybe I convinced myself it did not matter anymore. That my only job left was to disappear. Nora did not answer. She held his gaze and let the silence do its work. Mateo continued. I stepped in. I told the kid to put it down. I did not even think. I just moved. His mouth twisted. He fired. I felt the first hit like someone punched me with a hammer, then another. I remember tasting gasoline because my face hit the pavement near the pump. I remember thinking, so this is it. I did not even make it to the bridge. He inhaled shallow, then everything went dark. Nora's fingers curled slightly on her knee. She forced them to relax. Mateo's eyes searched hers. I woke up and you were there. And it was like for the first time in a long time, I believed there might be another option besides the bridge. Nora held that sentence for a beat. She chose her words carefully, not softening them into something false. You did not walk away, she said. You did not let that man die alone. Mateo gave a small, bitter laugh that held no humor. I did not do it for him. Not at first. I did it because I needed something to be true about myself. Nora nodded once. That is still something. Mateo's gaze dropped again. His voice quieted. When you told the room to let you lead, I heard it. Even through the tube. It sounded like the radio calls. Like the voice that means you are not alone. Nora felt the old world brush against the new again. The headset, the clipped commands, the way calm could cut through chaos. She kept her expression neutral. I was doing my job. Mateo looked up sharply. No. You were doing what you do. You do not get to pretend it is just a job. Before Nora could answer, footsteps approached. Polished shoes, steady pace. Dr. Vivian Cho entered the therapy gym carrying a folder pressed against her coat. She moved with the confidence of someone who did not need to raise her voice to be listened to. Behind her, Holloway followed, hands in his coat pockets. He looked less like a man who owned every room he entered, and more like a man who had learned some rooms were bigger than him. Cho stopped near Nora and Mateo. She glanced at Mateo with a professional smile. Gunnery Sergeant Alvarez. Mateo shifted in his chair posture, straightening by reflex. Ma'am? Cho acknowledged it with a small nod. You are making the therapists complain about you, she said, tone light. Mateo's mouth lifted. They are making it too easy. Cho's eyes warmed briefly. Then she turned to Nora. Dr. Kellen, she said. Do you have a moment? Nora stood. She kept her chair close to Mateo, not abandoning him, just changing posture. Cho opened the folder. Papers inside were neatly stacked. Nora caught a glimpse of a heading with Rivergate letterhead. Below it a list of bullet points, but Nora did not read them yet. Cho spoke quietly so the gym noise would not carry their words too far. We have had a measurable increase in veteran trauma cases over the last year. Not only gunshot wounds, not only accidents, the complicated ones, the ones with bodies and minds at war with each other. Nora watched Cho's face. I have noticed, We are good at protocols, Cho continued. We are good at clean lines and controlled environments. We are not as good at the kind of injury that does not behave. Holloway shifted behind Cho, uncomfortable but present. He looked at Nora, then away. His throat moved as if he wanted to speak and did not trust his own voice. Cho kept going. What you did in that operating room was not just skill, it was a way of thinking. You taught a room full of people in 5 minutes without making it a lecture. Nora's eyes flicked to Holloway. He held still, accepting the assessment. Cho tapped the folder lightly. Administration wants to offer you a permanent role here, not as a second assist, not on a temporary contract. Nora felt the words land in her body before her mind finished processing them. Permanent. Here. In this building where she had been treated like an experiment. Cho watched her closely. We want you to build a focused program for veteran trauma and transition care. Train staff, develop protocols, coordinate with psych and social work. Create a path so patients like Sergeant Alvarez do not fall through cracks because we only look at one kind of wound. Mateo listened from his chair, eyes moving between them. His face was careful, as if he did not want to influence the decision and could not help it. Holloway finally spoke, voice low. We need it, he said. There was no pride in the sentence, only fact. Cho extended the folder toward Nora. This is the formal offer. Title, salary, resources. It is real. Nora took the folder. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Not because of money or prestige, because of what it asked her to carry. She looked past them to the windows. The river moved steadily, indifferent to buildings and titles. The bridge stood with its steel ribs exposed, a thing built to let people cross from one side to another. Mateo's voice came quietly. Doc. Nora turned back to him. He did not plead. He did not perform gratitude. He simply said, if you build it, they will come in alive. Not just on stretchers. Nora felt her throat tighten. She forced a slow breath. Cho waited, giving Nora space without making it theatrical. Holloway stood still, hands in pockets, eyes on the floor for once. Nora opened the folder and scanned the first page. Her name printed cleanly. The role described in precise language. Lines about leadership, about training, about outcomes. The kind of words administrators loved. The kind of words that could either become a mission or become a cage. She closed the folder again and held it against her palm. I will do it, Nora said. The sentence came out simple. Not triumphant. Not emotional. A decision clean as a clamp closing on a vessel. Cho's expression softened just a fraction. Good, she said. We will start the process today. Holloway exhaled a sound that was almost relief. He looked up at Nora, and his eyes held something quieter than apology, respect that had nowhere to hide. Mateo leaned back in his chair, face loosening, and for the first time since Nora had seen him in the bright white room, he looked like a man who could imagine a day after the next. Nora held the folder at her side. She glanced once more at the river through the windows. Gray water moving, steel holding, a place to cross. Then she looked back at the therapy floor, at the parallel bars, at the sweat on Mateo's forehead, at the therapist watching from across the room, ready to step in. Finish your set, Nora told Mateo. He grinned. Yes, ma'am. Nora turned and walked with Cho and Holloway toward the hallway, the folder firm in her hand. Her steps steady, the building's hum wrapping around them like a low, constant tone that did not demand anything except that they keep moving. 6 months changed the hospital in small ways first. New checklists appeared on clipboards. Not longer, just sharper. The language shifted. People stopped saying stable when they meant unknown. A whiteboard went up outside Trauma 1 with names and times and a section titled Veteran Notes. It held things that never showed up on scans. Nora Kellen kept her office door open most days. The office was barely an office, a converted storage room with a narrow window that faced the river. The Mississippi ran gray and wide beyond the parking structures. On cold mornings, steam rose from it like breath. Her desk stayed clear, except for 3 items. A folder labeled Protocol Drafts, a jar of black pens, a small piece of rib bone sealed in a specimen cube. Lena had given it to her without a word one evening after shift change. Not a trophy, a reminder of what had almost been missed. Training started in the OR, just as Nora had said it would. Not speeches, drills, timing, angles, blood management. How to look at a wound and listen to what it was doing, not what it was supposed to do. Holloway showed up early for the first session. No entourage, no jokes. He stood by the instrument table and watched Nora lay out the tools the way she preferred, grouped by function and reach rather than by tradition. He did not correct her. He asked questions. Park attended too, arms folded at first, then slowly unfolding as the days stacked and the results showed. Her comments became fewer, more specific. She stopped testing Nora with barbed observations and started testing the protocol with real cases. Mason grew quieter in the best way. His hands stopped shaking. His voice got steadier. He learned to hold suction like a promise and not a punishment. and veterans started showing up. Some came by ambulance. Some walked in with stiff shoulders and eyes that stayed on doors. Some arrived for follow-ups and sat in the waiting room like they were guarding the exits. Social work learned to ask better questions. Psych learned to speak in shorter sentences. Nurses learned which touches helped and which ones made a man flinch. Mateo Alvarez came back too. First for therapy, then for check-ins, then because he found himself walking the hallways without needing a reason. By the time the dedication day arrived, he moved without the walker. He still guarded his left side, a subtle caution, but his steps were strong. The scar along his chest sat like a closed zipper under his shirt, a line that had been a doorway once. He wore a dark jacket and a white shirt with no tie. His hair was trimmed tight. His hands were steady on the notes he carried, though he did not look like a man who needed paper to speak. The ceremony took place in a renovated wing on the second floor near the windows that faced the river. Someone had put out trays of coffee and small pastries, the smell of roasted beans mixed with fresh paint and new carpet. Hospital staff gathered in clusters, badges catching the light. A few local reporters stood near the back notebooks, ready eyes, searching for drama. There was no drama, just people and the quiet weight of what had been built. A new sign hung on the wall behind the podium. The letters were clean and bold. The Alvarez Center for Veteran Trauma and Transition Care. Nora stood off to the side near the first row of chairs. She wore her dress uniform for the first time in years. The fabric sat stiff on her shoulders. The ribbon bars on her chest caught the window light when she moved. Her combat medical badge rested above her nameplate. The metal felt cool against the cloth, a small anchor. Lena stood a few seats behind her in navy scrubs, hands clasped, watching the room with the alert calm that never left her. When Nora glanced back, Lena gave a small nod. Holloway took a seat in the front row too, not as the star, as a colleague. He sat with his hands on his knees, posture attentive, eyes on the podium. Park sat beside him, expression composed, eyes sharp. Dr. Vivian Cho stepped up first. She adjusted the microphone with a quick touch and looked out at the room. "Thank you for being here," she said. Her voice was clear, unhurried. Rivergate has always been a place of high-level care. Today we add something we needed but did not have. A bridge between urgent medicine and long recovery. A program that treats a person, not a problem. She kept it short. She did not turn it into a speech about metrics. She pointed to the sign behind her. This center is named for a man who made a decision on a winter night, and for the work that followed. Sergeant Alvarez, thank you for agreeing to let your name stand for this. Mateo stood when she called him. Not rushing, not performing. He walked to the podium with the slow confidence of someone who had learned to move through pain and still arrive. He looked at the crowd for a moment, eyes settling on faces, reading the room the way Nora read wounds. Then he set his notes down and did not touch them again. When I came back from overseas, Mateo said I thought the hard part was done. A small ripple moved through the room. Not laughter, recognition. I could run, I could lift, I could follow orders, I could do my job. He continued, but I could not sleep, I could not sit with my back to a door, I could not stop hearing things that were not there. He paused, letting the words settle without forcing them. On the night I got shot, I was not looking for trouble, he said. I was looking for quiet. I was heading to the bridge. The room went still. Even the reporters lowered their pens. Mateo's gaze flicked to the windows for a beat. The river moved beyond the glass, indifferent and steady. I did not make it, he said. I ended up at a gas station, a kid with a gun, an old man behind the counter. And something inside me remembered who I was. He swallowed, one's throat working. I got hit. I went down. And I woke up in an operating room with a tube in my throat and no air in my lungs that belonged to me, he said. I saw a face I knew from a place most people only see in movies. I saw Dr. Nora Kellen. Nora felt eyes turned toward her. She kept her face calm. Her hands stayed relaxed at her sides. Mateo's voice stayed steady. I grabbed her wrist. I said what I could. I did not do it to be dramatic. I did it because I knew what her hands could do when things were messy and fast. Holloway's jaw tightened slightly, then eased. He did not look away. Mateo continued. She saved my life. That is the simple part. The harder part is that she gave me a reason to come back to myself. He placed a hand on the podium and leaned forward a fraction. This center is not just for people with scars, you can see, he said. It is for the people who come home and realize the fight did not stop at the airport. It is for the families who do not know what to say. It is for the nurses who want to help and need better tools. It is for the doctors who have never heard rotor blades in their head and still want to understand the patient in front of them. He paused again, then looked directly at Nora. Doc, he said the word, carrying warmth without making it casual. Thank you for not letting me become a statistic. Nora's throat tightened. She breathed in slowly and kept her eyes on him. Mateo stepped back from the microphone. The room stood and applauded. It was not a roar. It was a strong, steady sound that filled the renovated wing like a heartbeat. Cho returned to the podium and waited for the applause to ease. "Dr. Kellen," she said, "would you join me?" Nora walked to the podium. The uniform moved with her stiff but familiar. The floor under her shoes felt solid. She placed her hands lightly on the sides of the lectern and looked out at the crowd. She did not speak for a moment. She let the room settle. "I do not love speeches," Nora said. A few people smiled, careful not to break the mood. "I do love clear roles," she continued. "In an operating room, roles keep people alive. In life outside the operating room, roles can trap people if we forget they can change." She kept her voice even, her sentences short. "When Sergeant Alvarez came in, he was bleeding out," she said. "The room moved fast. We did what we could. We learned something that day. Not about heroics, about attention, about humility, about listening to what is happening in front of you instead of what you want to be happening." She let her gaze move across the front row. She met Holloway's eyes for a beat. He held it and nodded once. "This program belongs to all of us," Nora said. "It belongs to the nurses who count sponges when everyone else is panicking. It belongs to residents who learn to keep their hands steady. It belongs to surgeons who are willing to say, 'I missed it,' and then learn a better way." She looked toward Lena. Lena's expression did not change, but her eyes softened slightly. Nora lifted her chin toward the windows. "And it belongs to the patients. The river does not stop moving. We do not stop moving either. We do the next right thing, then the next." She stepped back from the podium. That was all. The applause returned, and this time it felt lighter, not because it was less sincere, but because the room had been given something to do with its emotion. After the ceremony, people drifted toward the coffee tables. All conversations started quiet and practical. A nurse asked about referral pathways. A social worker asked about intake questions. A surgeon from another department asked Holloway what had changed. Holloway answered without defensiveness. "We got better," he said simply. "We had to." Mateo stood near the windows with a paper cup of coffee steam rising in front of his face. He watched the river for a moment, like he was taking inventory of something that could not be charted. Nora approached and stopped beside him. The glass was cool, near her shoulder. "You did fine," Nora said. Mateo snorted softly. "You did not say I did great. That is how I know you mean it." Nora's mouth lifted slightly. "You told the truth." Mateo looked down at the coffee, then back up. "I start orientation next week," he said. "Counselor track. They said I have to learn how to sit still and listen." "You will hate that part," Nora replied. "I already hate it," Mateo said, "but I will do it." Nora nodded once. "Is good." On the other side of the room, Holloway stood with Park and Lena. He watched Nora and Mateo for a moment, then turned to a group of residents gathering near the protocol board mounted on the wall. "Come here," Holloway said, voice firm but calm. "Walk me through the blood plan for a close-range chest wound." Mason stepped forward first. His posture was straighter now. His hands were still. He spoke clearly. He did not look around to see who was judging him. He looked at the board and did the work. Nora heard the cadence of his voice and felt something loosen in her chest. A monitor beep sounded faintly from a room down the hall, a steady rhythm that blended into the building's hum. It did not spike. It did not scream. It was just there, measuring life with quiet insistence. Nora listened for a moment. The sound stayed a beep. It did not turn into rotor blades. It did not pull her away. Mateo glanced at her, reading her the way he had read her in the operating room. "You okay?" he asked. Nora kept her gaze on the river. "Yes," she said. "I am here." Mateo nodded. "Good, stay." Nora turned slightly, scanning the room. Staff talking in small circles. Cho speaking with a reporter, calm and direct. Lena refilling coffee for someone who looked too tired to notice. Holloway pointing at the board teaching. Park listening with her head tilted, eyes narrowed in focus, not judgment. Nora reached up and adjusted the cuff of her uniform, smoothing the fabric with her fingers. The gesture was small, grounding. Outside, the Mississippi kept moving. The bridge held its shape against the winter sky. Inside, the hospital kept breathing too. Not perfect, not clean, alive. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.